Welcome to Film Witch, a podcast with me, Sandy Settle, practicing pagan witch and tarot reader for over a decade, and a big fan of films. Here I talk about movies, their intersections with witchcraft and femininity, and whatever else I have on my mind, which is usually a lot. Blessed be. Come in and sit for a spell. And please rate and review me on Apple, follow me on YouTube and Spotify, and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. It helps way more than you might realize, and it means everything to me. Please consider joining my Patreon, which is the best thing you can do to help this podcast continue. You can also find me on Instagram and on Letterboxd at FilmWitchPod. You can send kind words, suggestions, and business inquiries to filmwitchpod@gmail.com. From 2020, Emma Woodhouse is a spoiled, rich young woman of privilege in Regency, England. Her daily life is filled with flattery, indulgence, and in the words of Jane Austen herself, very little to distress or vex her. All that begins to change when she meets Harriet Smith, a girl of little means and no great lineage, with whom she forms an immediate attachment, and Frank Churchill, the son of wealthy Mr. Weston, arrives in the sleepy town of Highbury to stir up mischief. All the many talks of the town are occasionally drowned out by the sage and earnest presence of Mr. Knightley, a longtime friend of Emma's family, and perhaps Emma's greatest confidant and truest companion. Autumn de Wilde's cornucopia of comedy and romance, based on what is arguably Jane Austen's wittiest work, is a feast for the mind, heart, and spirit. Hey everybody, it's me. So I know this episode is pretty late, but I have been quite busy in my personal life lately. April was an extremely busy month for me and my family. Some of y'all may know this, but we bought a house in last fall, in September of last year, actually, and we live up in the mountains, and it was a particularly brutal winter this year. Definitely a harsher winter than I think maybe any I've experienced. And I grew up in this state my entire life. So, it was just extremely cold, extremely windy, extremely snowy. Everything you can kind of think of that would make a winter harsh is kind of how things went down this year, especially the cold. It was really, really cold. We didn't really get anything done for the winter. It was mostly about just trying to keep warm. So since the weather's been turning, we've just been doing a lot of the projects around our home that we haven't had a chance to do yet. We have been living here for, less than a year. So our house is still coming together, and we have all these projects in the works. We also have our 2-year-old child. She just turned 2. And I am a full-time mom at this point in my life. So I make as much time in the day as I can for as many things as I can. And many days that time just runs out, and something has to kind of get cut out at some point. So I just haven't had as much time lately to watch films or to talk about them as I did over the winter when I wasn't really doing anything else. So I had plenty of time. But thank you for your indulgence, and thank you for being patient with me and all of those things. Anybody who supports this podcast in any way, liking any of the posts that I make on various different platforms, liking the episodes, rating me on Apple. That's a really big thing that you can do. That's really easy. That is a huge help to me, to get more people to listen to what I'm doing with Film Witch. It's small stuff. It takes, a couple seconds to go and click the 5 stars, and but it means a lot to me, and thank you very much if you have taken the time to do that. It is very significant to me. Thanks so much. All that being said, for this episode, I wanted to talk about a film that is very near and dear to my heart. I think it's probably the first non-horror film that I have covered thus far on the podcast. I am definitely a big horror fan, if you haven't guessed that already. If you haven't been reading my Letterboxd reviews, I'm definitely a big horror fan when it comes to media of all kinds. However, I contain multitudes, like all of us, and I like many things. And I would say that I have always been, I definitely was a bigger, not sure how to say this. I was definitely a little bit more interested in Jane Austen when I was younger. I definitely had like, a Jane Austen phase, kind of like I think a lot of, at least a lot, this is, I can only speak from experience, but a lot of American feminine people, right, tend to have some kind of Regency England Jane Austen phase in their youth, and I'm not exempt from that. But Emma has always been my favorite, and I think as I've gotten older, I'm 37 now. Emma is the one that sticks with me the most out of all of Jane's works, and it's the one that I always go back to. It's the one that speaks to me personally. I think it showcases what her work was really about, which I think kind of goes over the head of a lot of people who are maybe not delving, very deeply into what she was interested in and what she was really writing about. People are like, "Oh, she was a romance writer," and I could not disagree more. I think that Jane, like, for her stories, the romance was kind of always beside the point. She was really, really interested in social commentary. That was her primary interest, and that's what her focus is in her novels. She was observing the culture in which she was part of in her time, and she was commenting on it. She was writing down what she saw and what she heard and interpreting it, as all of us writers do, to make sense of it. And apply it to human nature at large. So yeah, she was, doing very important kind of anthropological work in a weird way. I'm sure, I don't know if anyone's ever applied the word anthropological to Jane Austen, but here I am, I'm doing it. So yeah, the romance is usually beside the point, we'll put it that way. So if you've never explored Jane Austen's work with that particular sentiment in mind, I highly recommend you revisit some of her work with that concept at the forefront of your perception of the work, right? So if you want to rewatch Pride and Prejudice, or you want to reread the book, or if you want to watch this movie, again, Autumn de Wilde's adaptation of Emma from 2020, or you want to watch the version with Gwyneth Paltrow, or my other favorite version of the story, which is the A&E version with Kate Beckinsale and Mark Strong as Mr. Knightley. That's also a really good version of that one. This story, one that I think is pretty underrated, honestly. That's the one I grew up watching the most. So, try to think of her as a social commentator, a sociologist first, and an enjoyer of romance second. All that being said, Emma is my favorite of Jane Austen's novels by a pretty significant margin. Emma is like way up at the top for me, and everything else is kind of like in the middle, from there. So it's like, I know, tons of people are probably wondering why I'm not doing this main episode about Pride and Prejudice, and I chose to instead do my Patreon episode this month on Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice from 2005. I know it's the 20th anniversary for that film, but this is my podcast, so I'm going to do it how I want to do it. And Emma is my favorite Jane Austen story, and this is my favorite adaptation of that story for film. So here we are. But yeah, if you want to listen to my Pride and Prejudice episode, please hop on over to Patreon, and you for $5 be able to access that episode and everything that I recorded prior to that for bonus episodes, for which I think there's 7 now. So yeah, there will be more. So when I first went to see this film, it was, I believe, opening weekend. And this film was released at the very tail end of February 2020. And as we all know, everything went into COVID lockdown the week after this film opened at the box office. And I remember the day that I went to see this, I had worked that day at the cafe that I worked at for a long time. And a really good friend of mine, Monica, was going to go see this with me. I remember at the last minute, she was unable. And I remember I was like, should I wait? And should we go next weekend? Like when she can maybe come with me? Or should I just go by myself tonight? And I decided to go by myself. I had a feeling that I should just go by myself and just, have a night to myself and enjoy myself. And I think it had been a little while, since I had been to the movies. So I was like, hell with it. I'm just going to go and I'm just going to enjoy this because um, I just really wanted to see this movie. And now I'm pretty sure that, I was getting like this intuitive sense that this was maybe my only chance to see this movie in a film, which would have ended up being true if I had skipped it. I think I would have missed it entirely because all the theaters closed. Um, I remember I remember going to see this and sitting there by myself, and there were some other people in the theater. It wasn't packed or anything. Um, I think it was at one of the Ritz theaters in Old City in Philadelphia, where I lived for 15 years. And I remember I had been going through a really difficult time in my life up until when COVID hit. Just a lot of really difficult personal things. Um, and I remember just like laughing so much and just like having like such a stupid grin on my face the entire time I watched this. You ever have like, one of those theater experiences that are so transformative and so like kind of indelible, like they're seared on your mind forever of being in a theater by yourself, whether or not there are other people in the theater. It's like you went there, just you to enjoy the film that you're going to watch. And having such a strong memory of like how you felt when you were watching this film, and just knowing that like that's an experience that always kind of belongs to you, and you alone, you in this film got to have this moment together, kind of where like no one else could really touch it. This was one of those film experiences for me, and I remember it just being like this almost like weird catalytic time for me, because like I said, I had been going through such a difficult period leading up to that, especially when it came to like my personal life and romantic situations and things like that, that it was just like it was just a really, really painful time for me regarding things like that. And this was such a healing film when it came to those concepts, like dealing with personal relationships and the human heart, and trying to decipher your own psyche and your own feelings about the people around you can be like so hellishly difficult sometimes because you're like just too close to those things. And this film, thankfully is like, ultimately so positive, and has such a warm, inviting, and it's like, it's like a hug almost at the end, you're just like so happy and you feel so contented that everything turned out the way it did, even though it took some difficulty and some self-reflection to reach that point. I have to talk about the cast a little bit for this. I think the more I've watched it, the more I'm just in love with everything about Autumn's vision for this story. I just think that there was obviously so much meticulous work put into everything, and the cast specifically is just like so perfect. Every role is like perfectly cast for this story. I can't tell you how many times I watched that A&E version of this story growing up. I had a DVD of it, and I just watched it like all the time, like once every few weeks, like through this period of my life in high school where I would just like watch this version of Emma and like memorize it and just like quote the entire thing. So when I was watching, Autumn's version, I just like knew like 3/4 of the dialogue already because a lot of it is, pulled directly from the book, like that A&E version with Kit Beckinsale is. And there are like little, nuanced differences. Like some of the language is tweaked a little bit to make it more accessible. Some of the scenes are like changed a little bit. Like the part where Knightley is kind of confessing to Emma that he loves her and is basically asking her to marry him. And she's like so confused because she's like, what? I thought you loved Harriet, and she just like has a stunning realization, and she has the nosebleed. That was like apparently Anya like really had a nosebleed in that odd moment, and Autumn decided that they should keep it. Stuff like that is different for this film. It's just kind of all feeding into like this kind of screwball comedy atmosphere that Autumn mentions in a bunch of different interviews as wanting the film to have. And she had everybody watch Bringing Up Baby and wanted them to see, Katharine Hepburn's performance in that and that sort of thing. So that's like kind of what she had in mind as far as like a general air of the tone of the film. But yeah, the cast in this is just like, oh, it's so perfect. And I think one of the things that I really love about Autumn's version is that she really, really understands how funny this book is. Like how funny Emma is and how funny a critique, how funny a commentary this is from Jane, and how sharp on people who are, humans are often so ridiculous, right? And I think another thing that Anya Taylor-Joy does really well in this film is she helps us understand how young Emma Woodhouse is supposed to be. Jane mentions in the very beginning of her book that Emma is 1 in 20, so she is 21 years old. And she, the estate that her family owns is called Hartfield. And her father, played by Bill Nighy in Autumn's film, and he's so fucking funny in this. He's so fantastic. He's one of my absolute favorites in this. As far as Hartfield goes, Emma is young and hasn't really been about in the world as a lady of her rank and her age at the time would not have been, right? She hasn't really had a lot of experiences outside of the sphere of her community and the sphere of her daily life. So I think it's important, and I think that, like I said, Anya and Autumn both do a good job at conveying that Emma is fundamentally naive in this way, right? She has not had experiences, yet she's confident that she understands everything very well and that her opinion is best, right? And so I think that's something that it's particularly sharp commentary from Jane Austen, right? Because I think she knew, as well as many of us do as we get older, that when you're young, you often behave in this way, right? You are confident that you don't have anything to learn and that you know what is best for everything, including the people around you, even though you couldn't possibly, right? There's no way you could possibly know what is best for all the people around you in that way. There's no reason you should have so much confidence in, what you yourself are doing or what you can offer the people around you, things like that. Those are things you are still sussing out within your own psyche. Those are things you're still trying to understand about yourself at that age. And you simply haven't had enough time to work all of those things out. And yet, you want to appear confident, you want to appear learned, you want to appear serious in that way. And so you put on airs, maybe not as to such an extreme as somebody like Emma Woodhouse, but you want to appear worldly, right? You want to appear intelligent and informed, and you want to appear wise in that way. And so I think a lot of young people, to one degree or another, behave similarly to a character like Emma Woodhouse. And there's that quote from Jane Austen where she said that I've created a character who no one will much like but myself, or something along those lines. She kind of seems to have thought that no one would really care for Emma, except for her as the creator. I think, through the eons, the longevity of Jane Austen's work has proven that, of course, plenty of people love a character like Emma Woodhouse. They see themselves in her. I know I certainly did for a long time when I was younger. I identified very strongly with Emma because I was always kind of like foolishly confident in that way and still struggle with that to some extent. I think I've fire rising sign of fire sun sign. So it's like my approach is that of being overly confident in many situations. So it's gotten me in hot water more than once, just being way too confident in what's going on and not giving enough credence or enough room to the feelings of others around me. And I think Emma also has this issue of not considering enough the feelings and the true desires of the people who she spends her time around. a lot of this cast I feel has gone on to be quite famous since there are smaller roles in this. Specifically, Josh O'Connor, who plays Mr. Elton in this, and he's hilarious. If you've only seen him in more serious roles, like what's that one called? God's Own Country. He's really, really good in that, but it's a super serious film. Or if you've only seen like Challengers or something, more contemporary, I think it's really fun to watch him in a period piece find the humor in such a ridiculous character. There were several scenes in this that struck me this rewatch where I just thought he was so fantastic and so funny. Yeah, he's just really, really great in this. There's just the list goes on. Such a phenomenal cast. Mia Goth is Harriet Smith. She's just perfect in that. Miranda Hart as Miss Bates in this film is, oh my god, she's so fantastic. She's funny. She's sympathetic. You like her. You can see that she's ridiculous. That horrid scene that's just like absolute pure cringe. Where they're having the picnic, and it's that scene where Emma is just being petty and just being mean because Frank Churchill is kind of egging her on and making her seem more charming than she is in the moment, and she's just feeling emboldened by that, and it's just kind of a testament to like how young she is and how inexperienced she is and how foolish young people can be sometimes, basically. But yeah, that scene's so good. And you really, really feel for Miranda Hart's Miss Bates in that scene. I feel like she like put so much heart into that moment compared to other, versions of this character. Yeah, her delivery, I think maybe it would be impossible for anyone else to do. She's just fantastic. And then I have to mention Johnny Flynn as Mr. Knightley. I think if you've seen other versions of this character, he manages to do something like totally wonderful with this role that I think perhaps no other version of Mr. Knightley that I've watched thus far has been able to really harness, which with like so much insight, right? With so much empathy. Just this, it's like if you read like contemporary fiction or like, like you know anything about like the current state of romanticy and things like that, there's a lot of discourse about how toxic a lot of that stuff is, while also there being, like a right for young femme people to read that stuff if it makes them happy. And, there's this like whole kind of back and forth about like all the different nuances about conversation like that. But I think, maybe the remedy to like the difficulties or the dangers of some of that material is to, give a young femme person a book like Emma. This is like what my solution is, I guess, as like an older millennial. I'm like, please just give them classic literature with like legitimately good men. Like, I always think of Emma, right? I'm like, I want to give young women Emma and say, Mr. Knightley is a really great male, character. If you really want, you want that itch scratched of like this really benevolent masculine energy. I think more so than any of her other male love interests, male protagonists, whatever you want to call them. I think Jane Austen's Mr. Knightley is the one that has always really appealed to me and made me feel kind of that really deep sense of satisfaction that they're like, like that feeling when you have when you're single, where you're like, are there any, like if you're a single femme person and you date masculine people, right? You're like a woman who dates men, or however you want to phrase that, right? You go through this period where you're like, does this thing that I'm hoping for in a masculine person under, white patriarchy capitalism, does this even exist? Like, is this person even real, or is this a fantasy that I've been fed, right? But I think that you come across a character like Mr. Knightley and a performance like Johnny Flynn's version of this character, and you feel a real sense of grounding, right? You feel a real sense that this could very much be a real person, that you have met people like this, right? like really benevolent masculine energies in the world, right? And very much so that they exist, and you should not settle for anything less than a Mr. Knightley. He's fantastic. Also, he is a musician in real life, and don't want to blow the load of talking about the end, but yeah, the Queen Bee song is an original composition by him, and it's so wonderful. So, speaking of the cast and how great they are and their impeccable comedic timing, between Josh O'Connor and Bill Nighy in that one scene at the beginning where he's like, in the time of man's great innocence. And Bill Nighy's like, innocence. No. Like every single time, it just absolutely fucking cracks me up. Like, it's like two like master comedians just like riffing, almost. It's just it's just a silly little innocuous thing. Like a lot of great comedy is a fucking silly innocuous thing. It's not like some big like joke with like a bombastic punchline. It's just like something small, silly, and stupid. Just like that. I watched a few interviews with Johnny Flynn and Anya Taylor-Joy and Autumn, just talking about various aspects of the film and why Autumn chose to do certain things. And I really liked one where I was watching where the interviewer asked about why the introductory scene with Knightley is like him like naked, like him getting dressed and them showing his bare bottom, and that being kind of like the first scene we get with Knightley. And I love it. I think it's fantastic. And I am almost like jealous that I didn't do that myself, But it seems to me that it was mostly like Autumn's desire, then she does this several of the times in the film, to just show people getting dressed at that time, or being dressed rather, as these people are more like, people of a higher income who could afford servants, and how the servants would literally dress them. And that this was just commonplace if you were a part of the upper class. And all the different pieces of clothing, it's just this wonderful kind of like period detail, right? And it reminded me of like almost something that like, not like literally, but like the aura or the vibe of what like Robert Eggers is doing right now, right, in his films, where he's just there's so much emphasis on period detail, right? And it's something that like he's mentioned many times grounds him in the filmmaking process, right, and grounds him in the narrative, is this attention to detail and this immersive kind of quality to it. And I feel like in many ways, Autumn is doing the same thing in this film, right? She is creating a real atmosphere for her actors to anchor themselves in, for she herself is this, primary storyteller to anchor, for Isabel Waller-Bridge, the composer, to anchor herself and to create all this or record all this beautiful folk music. I know Autumn a bunch of times mentions Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf as being a big influence on the soundtrack, and she wanted everyone to have their own theme akin to that composition. So everyone has their own music, to kind of indicate things about their character. And these are just wonderful little details that I think are often overlooked in period films. They're just thought about in a more rote fashion, and Autumn is consistently really doing interesting things with this. It makes it a real pleasure to watch. More on Knightley's introduction after, this scene where he's like getting dressed and is naked, which is appealing in and of itself if you're into men. He's also, as he's getting dressed, has this like sort of wonderful like mustard colored or honey colored coat that he wears to go over to Hartfield to visit the Woodhouses. And Alexandra Byrne, the great Alexandra Byrne, Oscar winner, did the costumes for this film, and they're just like so exquisitely beautiful. I particularly love Mr. Knightley's coat in the beginning of the film where he's walking over to Hartfield. Pay attention and look for that one. It's just really gorgeous. But yeah, I've long admired and loved Alexandra Byrne, specifically the costumes that she did for Ken Branagh's Hamlet, which, if you know me, you know I'm a big fan of that film. I'm Shakespeare girly, and I like Ken Branagh, and I like his Shakespeare films, and I'm a big fan of that particular version of Hamlet. And she has that kind of iconic, like black velvety, closely tailored jacket that Ken Branagh wears in that for a lot of that film. And just really gorgeous, really striking, just incredibly beautiful costume work. And artistic visual, language that is telling us about our characters and about who they are as people. In my notes here, I write that Johnny is a perfect knightly because he is both gentle and passionate. And I think that is kind of right at the heart of who he is as a character. Passionate when it matters, right? He's not angry because he is prone to anger. He's angry because he knows that something hasn't been done, that something that has happened isn't right, right? His passion comes from his sense of affection, and his sense of justice. There's a wonderful scene that I love very much. Towards the beginning, and it's Emma and Harriet, I believe, is sitting with her, and they're talking, and Knightley is kind of like half listening. I think he's like sitting there listening. He's like sitting there reading a book or something, but he's definitely. It's very obvious that he's listening to the conversation quite closely, but he's kind of pretending to be engaged with something else. Emma's kind of like, she's kind of talking, and going on and on about things the way that she kind of like masks her insecurities by talking a lot, the way that some people do, or seeming more confident than she is, right, about something. And there's kind of this like point made about Emma not being that she's not vain when it comes to her looks, right? That there's an understanding that she has that she's pretty, right? That she's physically attractive, but that she's vain, but not about her appearance, right? She's not like always fussing about her appearance. And Knightley kind of says this almost throwaway line that to me is a really great indication of the ways that Jane Austen respected her audience and wanted them to think for themselves about the dynamics of the characters. But that Johnny Flynn, I think, does a really wonderful delivery of that is my favorite. And he says, your vanity lies a different way. And he kind of just leaves it at that, right? He doesn't elaborate on that because they both know very well what he's talking about. And his commentary in that moment is kind of about how Emma is far too confident in her own opinion, right? That she lacks curiosity when it comes to her interactions with other people. She is only 21, and yet she feels this, misplaced sense of confidence that she can matchmake people in her community with each other, and that she can dictate when two people should be together and when they should not, right? When it comes to, her friend Harriet and the attentions of Mr. Martin, who is a tenant farmer who lives on Mr. Knightley's estate, Donwell Abbey. And Mr. Martin asked Harriet to marry him, and Emma feels like she says that, she thinks it's a better match, but she has decided already, she's dictated, right, that she thinks that Harriet should be with Mr. Elton. And it's very obvious, I think, to the audience, very, very much so obvious to Mr. Knightley, of course, that Mr. Martin is a very good match for Harriet and clearly cares for her, right? That she has some affection for him, though she is quite shy. And that the reality of the period is that she has no other prospects, no other legitimate prospects. And of course, women were not allowed to own property at this time, had very few ways of making their own income, And so it was very important for women of this time to be able to find a good match in marriage in order to literally be able to sustain themselves, to live comfortably, right? To live in relative comfort, you needed to have a good marriage. That was the way the society was set up at the time, right? And so there is a strong sense of practicality, right, in Knightley's argument with Emma about this, right? He is well aware that Harriet's well-being is very much so on the line, right, when it comes to whether or not she would accept someone like Mr. Martin, right? And he is also well aware that Mr. Elton has no real interest in her and someone like Harriet, right? He can see that someone like Mr. Elton is self-involved, right? And that he is only willing to marry someone if it benefits him. He has no real affection for any woman. So, Knightley's able to see these things because he is using empathy in his perception, right? Emma, wonderfully unlikable as she is not making an effort to perceive these things about her surroundings because she is living in a state of privilege and has since she was a child. Knightley has too. So, it's interesting that I think I like the juxtaposition, of these two different people, both raised in privilege, right? One of them opening themselves up to the perceptions of empathy and the other one closing themselves off for one reason or another. And I think much of it is, for Emma is inexperience more than anything, because it's clear to us that Emma is, deep down a fundamentally good person, but that she is not applying that compassion and kindness to her daily dealings and her interactions that she's having. I have this note here, and I wanted to bring this up too. More on Josh O'Connor and Mr. Elton. I just love the scene between he and Emma in the carriage on the way back from the Christmas party. I just think his performance in this particular scene, a scene that I watched a million times in the A&E version, right? And have it like every part of that film version of Emma is seared on my brain. So I kind of am always comparing the two, right? But like, there's this like fantastic thing I noticed when I rewatched this film this time around where Josh O'Connor, like, he has this moment where he totally switches up Elton. And like, it's like a mask falls away from this ridiculous person, right? They're in the carriage together, and Elton kind of like the carriage kind of goes over a bump, and he almost falls into her lap, and she's kind of like aghast at it because it's it's very improper. It's improper that she's even alone with him in the carriage for the time. It would have been considered kind of improper. But then he like kind of starts confessing to her, quote unquote, about like that he, has had his kind of eye set on her and has these designs to like kind of, get her to marry him. And she's shocked by this because she this whole time has been thinking that his attentions have been directed at Harriet, when it's very obvious, I think, to us and, to everyone else that he's kind of like sniffing around Emma. And she immediately rejects him, right? She immediately shuts him down. And this is the moment where we kind of see Mr. Elton's mask fall away, right? He's this extremely ridiculous, sort of foppish character, really simpering, like a really saccharine, always kind of like doing too much, right? And she says something about how she thought that he was interested in Harriet, and he is kind of like doing this thing, where he's like, it sounds like he's being nice, but we're very well aware that he's being insulting about Harriet, right? And he says that no doubt there are some men who may not object. Everyone has their level, right? And the way that Josh delivers this is just so, there's real coldness to it, right? Where he's like, well, some men aren't adverse to stooping that low, is basically what he's saying, right? And he drops all of this like pretense that he's had in every scene up until then. And you see that this is not a very nice person, right? This is just not a very kind person. And I think it's fantastic acting. It's fucking fantastic. I want to give some love to the production design for this film. A few things I noticed this time around. The lighting is really, really beautiful. The colors are really deep. Um, the Christmas dinner table scene where they're having Christmas dinner, everyone together, is lit so beautifully. There's like such warmth to it, really deep, rich colors. I put the word sumptuous in my notes for that. Yeah, several times just was really admiring the color palette, was really admiring the light and shadow work. Um, I absolutely adore the maximalism in the film. I'm sure there are some people who find it, distracting or annoying or off-putting somehow. I know there are some people in the world who are adverse to maximalism conceptually, but like I am a maximalist. If you come to my house, you're going to see that. The more things around me, the happier, more engaged, more interested I feel in my daily life. I think there are so many wonderful things. Why can we not enjoy all of them? That's kind of my whole ethos. Let's try to enjoy as much while we may, right? And so I am certainly a maximalist, and I love the maximalist aesthetic of this. It makes it always engaging to look at, always interesting. There's so many hidden treasures. Yeah, I think it's just wonderful. And juxtaposed with a film, that's a little more sparse romantically, definitely very warm, but also just like very different inherently stylistically. Since I also rewatched Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice for the bonus episode, and I was kind of comparing the style of the two films and like kind of their preoccupations, and yeah, just super interesting. I love seeing the kind of whole array of how you can adapt the works of Jane Austen this way, and I think that this version is more my particular speed, my particular style, and certainly this story speaks to me more personally than Pride and Prejudice. But I'm happy to see that there are many different adaptations of these stories, and it's wonderful to see all the different ways in which you can adapt these stories, right? That's really wonderful. I was watching one interview with Autumn where she brings up how great Clueless is as an adaptation of Emma, and I couldn't agree more. I think that Clueless is fantastic, and I love that interpretation of this story, and it shows kind of like the timelessness of what Jane was commenting on and what she was interested in, and the way that she was perceiving the foibles of humanity, and that those things are universal, and that no matter what era you're living in, I think we can see ourselves in characters like this. Once more, speaking about how wonderful the cast is, Callum Turner, who plays Frank Churchill, is really awesome in this. I love him in the BBC Warren piece as Anatole Karagan. He's similarly playing a very charming asshole in this one, and he's really good in those roles. I'm sure he's a nice person in real life, and I wish him no ill, but he's great at playing assholes. And he has a very particular understanding of fuckboy behavior. I don't know if it's because he's known a lot of guys who are fuckboys or what, or just been around a lot of men who acted in this way, and is turning on that part of himself that has kind of witnessed this behavior and things like that. But yeah, just a great interpretation of Frank Churchill and his particular brand of being a very smooth, very handsome and almost glamorous person, but a really smug asshole and just an inconsiderate jerk to people who everyone indulges, right? Because he's handsome and he has money and he's charming in a certain way, right? So everyone kind of lets him behave badly all the time. That's, a great interpretation of Frank Churchill. And I feel like Callum understood this character very well, similarly to how well he understood playing a character like Anatole Karagan. Yeah, he's just really good at playing assholes. So good for him, I guess. I found an interesting thing because I kept noticing this in all the promotional material this time around while I was kind of doing my research, and there's a period at the end of Emma for all the posters, and kind of I guess it's just it's this interesting stylistic choice. I guess Autumn de Wilde was asked about it, and she said it's because the film is a period piece. I feel like it's kind of more commentary on that kind of screwball tongue-in-cheek quality that she wanted the film to have. And yeah, it's just like a fun little like visual quirky thing, and there's a lot of like visual emphasis on this film in general. There's like almost an affectation, right? I think it's like partially it's a great choice because Emma is such an affected character, right? She's always putting on this kind of like affected outer self, right? Wanting to be taken seriously, wanting to be seen as cultured, when really she's quite young and inexperienced. And I think it's kind of a choice that she would make, right? And I like that Autumn was kind of like putting herself in Emma's brain for a minute with the period. I found a wonderful quote from an interview that Autumn did with Slate for this film, which was probably my favorite interview that I watched or read from Autumn for the promotional material for this film, when they were on their kind of like press junket. And I will read it out for y'all. One of the really important points to me was that I find Jane Austen really funny. I do too. Side note, Sandy says. I think she's extremely funny and hilarious and just understood people so well. Quote goes on. As an American, as an outsider, I wanted to bring American screwball comedy as a style into the making of the film. I just thought that this would be so interesting because in Bringing Up Baby, the comedy works because of the formality of that period, in that there's this disruptor. The second thing I wanted from the book was that I wanted to remind people how young they were, that Emma is young. She's very intelligent, but she's emotionally kind of stunted, with very little experience at friendship in general. The third thing that was really important to me is I said this is also a love story of two friends, not just Emma and Knightley, but Emma and Harriet. I have a lot of heartbreaking romance in my heart for my early best friends. The most hurt can be caused at that age when you don't realize that people are not disposable. I think a lot of girls have to learn about their friends or they have to learn how not to be a doormat, which was the case for me. And then what I thought was really interesting is that by making Harriet such a powerful character that you sort of take for granted as kind of a dingbat in the beginning, you realize there's a piece of all of us that are both Emma and Harriet. A lot of us think we're the victim like Harriet. If you really think about it, there have been times when you've been Emma, and that's really important. Yeah, I think maybe that's like a wonderful takeaway of Jane Austen's work in general, right? Is that she's sometimes not playing with like certain, in fiction we're often playing with archetypes, right? We're not like literally trying to convey character like people that we know. We're more often taking little bits and pieces of people that we know, and we're wrapping them all together into kind of a Frankenstein's monster of archetype, for lack of a better way to say that. And I think that often, fiction is better interpreted when we can apply many different kinds of characters to ourselves, right? Rather than abstracting them to, an outside kind of vantage. I love that in that interview, Autumn kind of brings up an emphasis on the maturation or the growth of the friendship between Emma and Harriet. And I think that, particularly Anya and Mia in this, both do a wonderful job of just portraying a genuinely warm affection between them and a friendship that feels real and that grows. I think is particularly well done in this version of this story. But yeah, I think they both do these roles beautifully and convey a lovely, warm sense of growth and at the end, that there's a real empathic friendship between them that can hopefully last a long time from a better understanding of one another. Towards the end here, I wanted to talk about, which is maybe my favorite aspect of the film, which is the story between Knightley and Emma. I think I really I relate quite a bit to this particular trajectory because I think more than anything, rather than like a literal, parallel in situation, for me, it's more about this sense that for a long time, similarly to Emma, I think I was looking for fulfillment or purpose in outside things and not kind of listening to the more compassionate version of myself, or what that version of myself needed, right? Um, there comes this point, in the story of Emma where she kind of realizes that the person that would be best for her has been there this whole time. There's a sense of like they've been right under your nose, right? Like this person that she sees every single day is really the person that loves her the most, right? And forgives her the most readily and understands her better than anyone and adores her. um, Despite her flaws, right? Almost like loves her flaws, like as much as any of us can love each other's flaws, right? A character like Knightley, I think, is written so well that you believe that even in those moments where he's so frustrated with her because he can see what she is capable of and sees her not being that version of herself, right? And it makes him nuts because he knows that she's better than that, but she's not. Leaning into that better, those better angels of her nature. And yet, always, it's like the first person to forgive her, right? Like, just cares for her so unconditionally, right? I think that like one of the things I love about the film every time I rewatch it is the gentleness with which Johnny approaches this character, right? And that there's just like this real sense of measured approach to him. And there's these moments where he's like very flustered, like after they're at the ball, and there's that wonderful shot of them both from behind, they're kind of standing in the doorway. And they decide to dance with each other, and there's just like this like realization that like hits him like a bolt of lightning, like he's spent years and years around this person and has never quite seen her with those eyes until that very moment, the dawning realization that he's had. But up until that moment, this has been like a relatively reserved and measured character that we've seen. It's almost like this hidden part of him that's like suddenly like the doors opened and we see like this hidden heart of him, it's just like, there's so much nuance to it, and it's just so enjoyable. and it's just so believable, right? I think if you've ever had a realization like that about someone, it's just like you feel like a sense of panic. like what have I been doing this whole time? That kind of thing. So I think I felt that way a little bit. Maybe I relate to that because I felt that way a little bit with my husband. We had been coworkers for maybe like 4 to 6 months when I had a dawning realization about being interested in him. And it was like it came over me all at once. I remember where I was like, it was something I had never consciously been aware of until that moment, right? Maybe because we had been going through this slow process of getting to know each other in these kind of like professional environments, right? And hadn't had any like time to get to know each other personally, really, but that we were still like spending all this proximity with each other, and we were like seeing each other like every day and all this stuff. And then I like remember I just like felt like this sense of like, I want to get to know this person, like not at work, like that. And I was just like, so, and because I had had kind of like this kind of atrocious string of bad luck in my romantic partnerships up until that time, in my romantic life, I remember I was just like, oh God, like, what if he doesn't see me that way? What if he has no interest in me that way? And if I ask him out, we have to still see each other because we work together, and it was like this whole like panic that washed over me in that moment, So I feel like I can relate to kind of Knightley's like almost like horrific realization of loving Emma, right? Where he's like, oh God, I've known this person for ages, and what if what if she doesn't feel that way about me? That kind of thing. And what am I going to do if she doesn't? Like this panic in him, right? That Johnny conveys really well. He's a musician more so than an actor, Johnny Flynn, and he wrote the beautiful song at the end. I know that Autumn and Isabel Waller-Bridge kind of came to this decision about all of the music being folk music and kind of being anchored in the time that way, right? And Johnny wrote Queen Bee, the song over the credits, in the period style. And he meant for it to convey Knightley's perspective about Emma. And I think it's just really beautiful. I was so happy when I heard that was specifically what he had in mind. Just makes that song so much better. I think, final note for me is that I just have been really obsessed with the love story between Emma Woodhouse and Mr. Knightley for basically my entire life. And this is the version that I think is kind of like the ultimate version of this story for me. I know a lot of people might say Clueless, which is also great in its own right, but I just love the period detail and the maximalism and the cast in this one and the beautiful music and the costume design. I just think all of the things cohere, right? It's cohesive in a way that I was basically waiting for my entire life, as this has always been my favorite Jane Austen novel, and I think it's the funniest, and I like the love story the best, and all of those things. So just so grateful that it exists in the world now. And this time around, I think I didn't expect to be so moved by it. By the end, I was like crying, watching this, and I wasn't sad. They were like these joyful tears. Like I'm, one of those people who just kind of cries over everything. So, but I think I just didn't expect to cry over this one because it's so happy, right? Like this is such a happy film in the end, and everybody kind of gets the happy ending and everything. But I think it's some kind of nuance in the performances between Johnny Flynn and Anya Taylor-Joy in this that there's just such a tenderness to it, right? And such a delicacy and a depth of understanding that is conveyed between the two of them in those last few scenes. And that kind of like last shot of them reaching for each other's hand, right? I think maybe part of watching it now for me is that I first saw this film when I was really, really hoping for something like that in my own life, right? A dynamic like that with another person. And now when I watch it in 2025, after my husband and I have been married for this year, toward the end of this year, it'll be 3 years. But, and we have a 2-year-old. Yeah, I think, being in the part of my life that I'm in now where I do have those things, where I do have that companionship in a real, legitimate, nurturing, sustaining way, as is meant to be conveyed at the end of this film, right? Oh, that just really hits you. It hits you hard, in that really deep part of yourself that once hoped for something that now belongs to you. Very moving. Yeah, I was definitely crying this time around. Happy tears, but yeah, absolutely in tears. Autumn is most well known for probably her, other than for this film, right? But prior to her making this film, she had done a bunch of music videos and had worked on fashion campaigns. I know she had worked on one for Prada, and was kind of primarily a photographer, or saw herself as more of a photographer, right? Leading up to this time, she did some music videos for Florence and the Machine that I think some of the younger adults are very familiar with. I always think of the one that she did for Big God, which just has like all these women dancing in these beautiful, like kind of colored flowing gowns and this totally dark stage with water on the floor. Yeah, just really striking. But I tried to find any information I could about whether Autumn is planning on doing any other films. I couldn't find anything. And it's 2025 now, so it's been 5 years since she made Emma, right? So I'm just very curious. I would love for Autumn to make another period piece specifically. I think she has a real like eye for it, like just a really beautiful eye for detail, right? She seems like a really interesting, lovely person from all accounts, and I would Autumn, please make something else. I'm gonna send that energy out into the universe. But thank you for making this perfect version of Jane Austen's Emma for me. I really couldn't. Upon rewatching it several times, I feel very confident now in saying this that I don't think that anyone could make a version of Emma that I love more than this one. I really don't. To me, it's become perfect, right? I don't think I felt that way the first time I watched it because my heart was so kind of attached to the Kate Beckinsale one because I had watched it a million times. But the more I've watched this one, the more I feel like this is like the ultimate version of Emma, right? That really understands this story, that the cast really understands these characters, that the filmmaker really has a vision, and everything coheres, right? Everything becomes this whole that feels complete. So thank you, Autumn, and thank you, everybody in this wonderful cast. As ever, at the end of this episode, I am sharing a spell, and this spell is a simple one. It's called meditation for the well-being of a loved one. And I know I did a meditation spell last time as well, but I promise this one is easier than that one. This is a straightforward one that is easy to do, and you don't have to be a more advanced practitioner like that prior spell was. So get an object that reminds you of this person that you love. It can be something that reminds you of them, something that they gave you, anything like that. It really doesn't matter. Something that speaks to you, you know, that feels important. All of that works. This can be a person that you love platonically or romantically, any kind of love, any deep affection that you have. And for any reason, I'd recommend, you know, like a gemstone or a crystal that reminds you of the person, but you can really use anything. You can use, you know, if they've given you a gift, you know, anything like that. At this point, I would hold it in your hands, or I would maybe set it on the table in front of you while you do this next part, and then pick it up and hold it in your hands again. You can light a stick of Palo Santo, or you can light some kind of incense. If you light incense, I would try to make sure it's like some kind of correlation to the season that you're in. So if it's summertime, maybe like some cedar incense or some rose incense or something like that. Palo Santo, I kind of always think of as like a late spring, early summer incense. Right now for me, it's right after Beltane. So Palo Santo is definitely, I think, great for this time of year, particularly. If it's in the fall, you know, you can light apple, something like that. So sit cross-legged on the floor, preferably. I would recommend sitting cross-legged the way that you would at the beginning or the end of a yoga class, right? So you're kind of staggering one foot a little bit in front of the other rather than like stacking them on top of each other, kind of, if that makes sense. It just enables you to kind of like sit up a little straighter, which is ideal for meditation. I would recommend having your back against a wall or some other fortifying thing. You know, if you have a really comfortable chair that enables you to sit straight, something like that. If you have trouble crossing your legs, you know, things like that, sitting in a chair is also fine. Like I said, just, you know, try to sit up straight, and it'll help you. It's better. It's a better form of meditation, right? If you can kind of just like sit so you can breathe really deeply, basically. So hold the object in your hands, close your eyes, breathe in deeply. If you can, you know, sort of start doing measured breathing, often that can help you get into a meditative state if you're not used to meditating. If you're used to meditating, you know, get into your meditation the way that you normally would. Think about this loved one and what they need at this time. If you're aware of something specific that they need, focus on that. If you're unsure, envision them with their heart chakra illuminated. So the heart chakra is said to be green, right? In the Western world, we often think of love being associated with the color red or like pink. But the heart, the way that the chakras are kind of envisioned, that part of the self, of the spirit, it's a green color. So think of that, rather than like this kind of like Western notion of red associating with the heart. When I think of the heart chakra, I like to think of green things that are growing. If you like look at a pothos plant and how like all the leaves are kind of like spilling out, that's kind of how I think of the heart chakra myself. That it's like a living thing that is growing. I also like to think of the northern lights, like the aurora borealis, and like how sometimes some of it is green. Kind of like a spiritual manifestation. Imagine yourself also with your heart chakra illuminated, right? This is going to establish a connection between you and the person that you're thinking about. And here I would say, just to ground yourself further in this meditation, just think about all the things you love about this person. You can say this little affirmation if you want. And you don't have to also. If you just want to be silent and meditate on this person that you love and think about, all the things that you love about them and send them all that positive love energy, that's also lovely and that's great. So you can say, I send my love to you. Here you can insert the name of the person. Dear one in my heart, I know my love will reach you exactly when it's meant to. No matter how far apart we are, may Source bless you. You can say the person's name again here. For all your days. And on that note, as above, so below, and peace out. Until next time. This podcast is produced by David Settle. He also made the music.